So hi everybody. We're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about iNaturalist and related projects that will be using iNaturalist. So we're going to talk about how iNaturalist works. We're going to also talk about the scientific platforms that integrated with the iNaturalist and the methods of how to make good plant observations or in general for all species, and City Nature Challenge, and how to start using iNaturalist, the details. So iNaturalist is a really important tool that's been the greatest ever for our naturalist community. It's designed as a community science platform to produce valuable data for biodiversity distribution. It's a community that anyone can contribute in their own ways. So everybody can take pictures of organisms and upload it to the platform. And some of us can help with the expertise. We can help to identify those pictures into species level. And we focus on things in the wild. So we try not to look at plants and animals that's kept by human beings. And what I found really valuable in iNaturalist is that it's basically an evolving field guide, because we have these real people contributing in real time. And sometimes we can see species that cannot be found on internet otherwise. So some of my observations have these pictures that's not been seen on the internet, and different experts from all over the world, they can contribute their knowledge and help us to identify species. To make observations valuable for science, we have to make it research grade. So what is research grade? It means that this organism must be wild. It's not brought by not intentionally introduced by humans. So not a garden or a pet. And you must have. You look at the right side. You can see you must have a specific date, a specific location to make it research grade. And once you have two people agreeing on the same ID, you can get it to research grade. So usually, in most of the cases, two people should be enough. But sometimes you have more than two wrong IDs. Then you need more than two people that correct it to make a research grade. And here is an example of how iNaturalists help us understand the movement of species, new discovery in our city. So back in 2020, I found this new sedge growing on roadsides. And so I uploaded it to iNaturalist. And this is how we know that this species is well established in the city. It's never been found in New York State before. And through iNaturalist, many of these examples, new species are discovered to grow, like introduced unintentionally by human activities. So this is one of the example. This is a research article on a newsletter of the New York Flora Association.
So I would just note these are 4 of Zihao's observations of the species that are cited in the newsletter, and an example of the earliest one, which is the one on the far right, I think. I forget. No, the third one there. And I'll just brag for Zihao that he has half of the research grade observations of the species. These 3 are half. There's only 21 observations of the species in the entire world, and Zihao has 6 of them.
Yeah, I was trying to get one in each borough, so to show that it's been here, it's been firmly established in this area. It's from Asia, and yeah.
Okay.
So now Chris is going to talk about the integration with other scientific platforms.
Okay. Part of what makes iNaturalist useful for science and research is that it provides some ways that other platforms can get at the observation. We're going to talk about what the requirements are for that to happen. You can go into iNaturalist and look at observations and filter by research grade, but you might not want to have to go to multiple places to get things. So there is some consolidation of information. We're going to talk about these three: the Open Research and Contributor ID, or ORCID, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF, and Global Biotic Interactions, or GLOBI. Don't worry about this complicated picture. This is just an overview of all the sort of connections that we're going to be talking about. So we're going to revisit this at the end once we've explained everything. So first of all, ORCID, if you have registered with ORCID, you have a record, what ORCID calls a record. And you can go to the ORCID site for anybody who's registered there and look at their page and see a bunch of information about them, like things that papers they've published and so on. So there's a section there for website and social links where ORCID users can put whatever information they want. One thing that's useful to do is to put a link to your iNaturalist profile. So that's something that's easy to do. It's just a way of surfacing that in ORCID. It doesn't affect any of the other integrations I'm going to be talking about. The one that really matters more, it's not a requirement, but it's recommended if you have ORCID, is to link from iNaturalist back to ORCID. That's a two-step process. We're not going to get into that right now. But just know that if you look at your profile, if you scroll way down, right below your kind of description and your that you put in your profile, there's a ORCID slug that looks like that. And if you click that, it'll take you over to your ORCID record. And that's it. So that's the link back. What's more interesting is that will actually get exported to one of the platforms I'm going to talk about. This is definitely a requirement for things getting out of iNaturalist into these other platforms. You have to have what's called a compatible license. You can know if the license you have on your profile is compatible or not because it'll have this little GBIF logo. And again, the iNaturalist has a lot of information on it. It's I think this is in the right-hand column of the profile. If you scroll down, you'll see default observation license. And these are the licenses that are compatible: public domain, attribution, or attribution non-commercial. For my profile, I've chosen attribution non-commercial because I've had bad experiences with people ripping off my images. So I don't want it to be used for commercial purposes. I do want to be able to contribute to open science. GBIF is the occurrence sort of data set. It aggregates a lot of different sources. So one of the things that's interesting is you can see both iNaturalist observations and records from, for example, herbaria, or for my interest, insect collections. So the American Museum of Natural History, for example, has a very large collection of bees, including some that have been collected recently as part of specific surveys. It's interesting going through it because there's so little information compared to what iNaturalist gets in there. Like all the details that iNaturalist has, everything has to be entered manually for a museum specimen. Of note, GBIF, the iNaturalist versus American Museum of Natural History, as of last year, iNaturalist surpassed the number of bee records. It surpassed American Museum of Natural History. So it's an example of how iNaturalist is contributing to science. So on your profile, don't worry about the order here. They're not in the right order, but there'll be At the bottom of at the bottom of an observation, you'll have the copyright ID, the copyright information. So this is where it's saying on the observation now that it's not showing you that it's a compatible license, but it's showing you what the license is: Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial by NC. It's research grade, and so this is eligible to be imported by GBIF. And there's a lag, so it doesn't happen as soon as you become research grade. GBIF, I'm not sure what the frequency is, but at least within 4 weeks or a month after the observation has become research grade, as long as there's nothing else interfering like the license, GBIF will see it and import it into their data. And the observation in iNaturalist becomes a occurrence. So GBIF can have both occurrence and absence. Like if you've gone out specifically to survey for something that used to be on a site and you didn't find it, you could record that as an absence. But iNaturalist can't record absences of something. There's a lot more info. Oops, sorry, that was not intentional. There's a lot more information in GBIF than this. For example, my iNaturalist username is there as observed by. Because I have my ORC ID, it'll also show observed by ORC ID there. And it also works for identifiers. So if you are the first one on an observation to identify something to the agreed upon taxon, so whatever the community agreement is, if you were the first person to identify it as such, whether it's your observation or somebody else's observation, that observation will also show up as identified by your iNaturalist username. And if you have your ORC ID on your iNaturalist profile, it will also show up as identified by ORC ID. So one reason to use the ORC ID is it's a way of collecting all of your contributions and linking them together. GloBI has the same requirements. The license on the observation has to be compatible, and it has to be research grade. But there's an additional thing that GloBI is looking for. And iNaturalist gives you the opportunity to add a lot of metadata. Usual things like tags and stuff like that, but there's also something called annotations where you can say, is it dead or alive, and so on. But the really open-ended is the observation fields. There's probably over 1,000 of them. It's very it's complex, but you end up settling on a few. Like, I really like interaction visited flower of, and so whenever I'm photographing and adding as an observation an insect on a flower, I'm adding this observation field. And that then is something that GloBI is interested in, because they're interested in interactions. So any kind of association or interactions between two organisms, and this is not the only one. There's like 100 different observation fields that GloBI will use to take into itself anything that's going to show an association between organisms. In GloBI, these associations are bidirectional. So I'm showing the direction that matches my observation. There's a reverse association of the flower is visited by the insect. That is automatically generated by GloBI. So you have both directions. It's interesting when you're looking at garden plants, because an observation of the garden plant should be marked as cultivated, and it wouldn't be research grade and wouldn't make it into GloBI. But if you take a photo of the insect with the garden plant, and you could even link those observations in iNaturalist, then that will show up, and it'll show up bidirectionally. So it's just kind of a cool way of documenting these things. So we've covered all of these things. We've touched on all these different criteria and filters and everything of how you can take full advantage of iNaturalist as a science platform. Over to Zihao.
Okay, we're going to talk about how to actually make good plant observations. It's very important for the community. So let's ask ourselves the question, why do you want to make good observations? Like, what's the point? You don't work for iNaturalist. Why do you want to make good pictures? So first of all, so there are different scenarios. So first one, it is for most people, when you don't know what this is and you want to find the answer to this species, you want to ask someone on iNaturalist. So of course you want to provide the as much detail as possible for the expert to see, so they can identify it, so to make their life easier. And the second scenario is that now you know the species, you want to take a picture to document its occurrence at this location. But for other people who don't know about this species, they want to learn how to identify them. So if you have good pictures showing all the characteristics, it's helpful to other people who want to learn about this species. So iNaturalist is basically a social media, a form of social media for naturalists community. And let's think about what you do on Facebook or Instagram. You want your best pictures shown on your profiles. You want to do the same on iNaturalist because you want to show your best side, and that's why you should make good pictures and good observations. So the key to make good observation is clear pictures with all the possible details you can show in the pictures. So first of all, when making an observation, you want to have a very accurate location. Sometimes your phone, the GPS is not working quickly enough for the location to zoom in. So in this picture, you can see that I was standing in a crosshair location, but my phone was thinking that I was standing across the street. So I was looking at a moss on a wall, and I want to come back here next time to observe this moss. So I have to make the most accurate location here. So I look at the house across the street from me. So I look at the door number so I can match the exact location with the Google image. So you can use different landmarks like street trees in the city, like sidewalk, and the shape of the buildings to make sure you have the exact location. And you can also check your GPS setting on your phones to make sure it's most accurate, and you can adjust that kind of thing. But this is one of my hobby, to make sure I have the most accurate location I can go back to from time to time to observe. And now back to how to make good plant pictures. So first of all, good picture doesn't mean that they have to be artistic. They have to be good looking. They can just be focusing on the anatomy of the plant. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to look good. Like this picture I took, I don't like it. I don't like the edges. I would trim these sometimes to make it look nice. But you can see all the necessary details in my picture. So this is the point, to provide all the necessary characteristic of the plant. So there are many parts of the plant you should pay attention to. So make sure you photograph both sides of the leaf and the surface texture of the stem and the bark and the branch. And for many plants, if not most, we encounter in our life, fruits and flowers are the most important features. They are the reproductive structures, and make sure to get those if you have them. And in the winter, the deciduous plants, they lost the leaves, so you have to look at the buds for reliable identification. And a reminder is that for any beginner, you can take many pictures and upload it to the same observation. You can see in this example, I took many pictures just to make sure I show all the good parts, the small parts. And I'm going to talk about how to get these kind of pictures through a hand lens, so you can get the details at a very small scale. And another advice is to take a time. So we're observing nature, and naturally you want to relax and carefully observe what you're looking at. So I would say that quality is always more important than quantity. So there are different ways to use iNaturalist, and we enjoy different ways of using iNaturalist. So the first one is to take picture. I've seen observations on iNaturalist that from people who sitting on a bus, and they just took a picture of the street tree they saw through the window. The second way to use it is to treat it as a competition. You take as many observations as possible of the same weedy plant, like in for example, mugwort is a very common plant. And the third way is to, for most people, for most of us, we see an unknown plant, we want to find out what it is, and then you take a picture and upload to iNaturalist. And the fourth way is what I do sometimes, is that I like this species, I know what it is, but I like to document it in this location. So I make an observation for artists to see. It's also kind of like a game, like Pokemon Go. So you got to catch all the species or observe all of them. So it's fun. And there are attempts in the past to capture the common species in different projects, and like us, so we're seeing 5 of the most common observations on iNaturalist for New York City. But if you really look into your natural surroundings, are these really the most common species, the most numerous species in the New York City? Not necessarily, because the way we observe species, we don't do a thorough scientifically based survey. So the numbers don't mean much when it comes to the reality. So for example, white snake root is probably not the most numerous plant in New York City, but it has the most observations. So why does this happen? So here you can see the gamification of iNaturalist. So you can see this is the ranking of observations for the second one, the mugwort, like we just saw in the last slide. So out of 10,000 observations, you have top 2 users almost taking all the pictures. So it means very little when it comes to documenting the distribution of a species. So my advice is not to rush, not to compete with others. I know it's tempting, it's a social media, you want to show off your, I don't know, your speed or your energy by taking as many observations as possible. It's tempting. You see the ranking, you want to compete with others, but I don't think that's a good way to use iNaturalist.
If I could just make a personal
Sure.
observation. So
Yeah.
this was something that I experimented with last year for the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey. And the gamification was strong in me. I wanted to have more observations than somebody who makes a lot of observations. And they were getting all these observations without even trying to contribute to the project, whereas I was trying to focus on pollinators at specific taxa that they were surveying. I was successful. I'm #1 in those projects, but it was exhausting. And eventually the quality suffered. I had a lot of poorer quality, fewer research grade observations as a result, just trying to get my numbers up. So, lesson learned for me of what my limits are and what I'm comfortable doing. I'm definitely on the quality over quantity side of things. I'm with Zihao on this.
Oh, thank you. So now we're gonna talk about actually how I take pictures, my personal experience. So there are a couple of tips, but the most useful tip is to use a hand lens. As you can see in the picture, it's a hand lens. You can buy this for as low as $10. I think that's like the lowest price, but it's really cheap to get. And then once you have this, in combination with smartphone, which I assume most of you use to take pictures these days, it becomes very powerful tool to access the most useful level of details needed for plant ID on iNaturalist. And also the second method is to use your hand. You hold a small piece of plant part against your palm, and it makes your smartphone focus so much more easily. And also you can use same idea. If the background is grayish, it makes the camera to focus on the object you're photographing. So concrete pavement is a very good background if you want to focus on a small branch. You can also play with your settings on your camera phone. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to talk about how to photograph, but my best advice would be to getting a hand lens and use it in combination with your phone. And next slide, I will show you how I do that. So here's how I do it. So you don't have to do the same thing I do. I use one hand only to hold both the hand lens and my phone. You can use one hand to hold the hand lens and one hand to hold your phone, and it works the same. So you can see I'm taking a picture of a small moss. So with this method, I can get very fine details of the plants without a fancy camera. I'm going to show you the effect in the next two pictures. So this is a liverwort. You can see the dollar coin next to it. It's really small. So this is the best detail you can get with your smartphone without my hand lens. But once you have a hand lens in front of the phone camera, now you can see individual leaves on the liverwort. You can see the details that you won't be seeing otherwise. All this is accomplished through the use of hand lens. So I highly recommend everybody, you should get a hand lens if you can observe this. Oh, I should mention that this is not my idea. This is not my invention. I was going on a mushroom walk with the New York City Mycological Society. So they told me that you can use hand lens to look at the fungus, the tiny fungus, and then use the phone this way. And that's how I'm starting to use this method on all of the observations. And you can use this on insects too. So everything works here. So going back to my second advice, to use your hands, your palms to make a good background, to make a camera focus. Because sometimes when the background is very messy, your smartphone camera will refuse to focus on the object itself. So holding it, like touching the plant directly, you will get such good result. Because it also improves the speed. So in this way, you don't need to like change a camera setting and to try to focus. This is a very quick way to photograph small plant parts. Same idea, next slide. This is a great background. And this is a very small tweak. And you can see the details once you have the background that help your camera to focus. So the next, I will give it back to Chris to talk about City Nature Challenge.
Alrighty then. So we have kind of assumed that people have some familiarity with iNaturalist in going into this. We didn't go into a lot of detail about what it looks like and stuff. City Nature Challenge, not assuming that people know about this. So I'm going to explain what this is and why you might want to get involved. So City Nature Challenge is based on iNaturalist. It's a bioblitz where you're surveying how many different species are in a given area over a certain period of time. It's the largest bioblitz in the world at this point. We'll talk a little bit about the numbers on the slides coming up. There are two phases to it because iNaturalist has, both observers and identifiers. There's an observation period. That's the constraint of the bioblitz, the time constraint of the bioblitz. Which is always 4 days from a Friday through a Monday. And then there's the identification period, because if you're really concentrating on going out and getting as many observations as you can, you may not have had time yourself to identify everything. And you're trying to get as many different organisms. So, talking about numbers here, we're not trying to just get, 1,000 observations of mugwort. We're trying to get how many different introduced or invasive plants can we find just growing wild. I've found that street tree beds are really rich in weeds and good places to go find things. And a abandoned lot across the street, I found a dozen species in a 1 foot by 1 foot square. It's just amazing what you can find. So you go out, you make as many observations as you can, and you try to upload them as you go so that people can be identifying them. The identification period is kind of after that so that people have time to go back and identify things. It's also if you have a, quote, real camera, unquote, like I do, or I have special equipment to photograph insects, it gives me time to upload them. So that's what the identification period is for. And then the following Monday, the results are announced. Now, it's the City Nature Challenge. It's cities all over the world. You can take a look at the City Nature Challenge website to get more information about, how this all works. I do need to say the City Nature Challenge is organized by the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, and you'll see why in a moment. The first City Nature Challenge was 2016, and it was between those two institutions. It was a competition between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and they were relating it to a larger bioblitz effort that they were doing at the time. The next year, it went national in the United States, and 16 cities participated. The following year, more cities. The following year, more cities, and more and more and more. This year, we've got 443 cities participating as of yesterday, and many different countries. You can also see the number of observations. It's interesting that the number of observations dropped in the first year of the pandemic, but jumped back up in the second year. And the number of species and observers continue to increase despite the pandemic. So it's very interesting that people found this as an opportunity to get out and observe nature, and was sort of a welcome break to get outside. There weren't any organized events because we weren't trying to bring people together, and it wasn't a competition either. And so the competitive aspect of it, like which city won, that's kind of been taken away. It's always going to be a city in South Africa, like Cape Town or something, because they just got incredible stuff there. In 2019, New York City now was in the first national one and is participating every year. In 2019, the Battle of the Boroughs was introduced as a way of gamifying some, friendly competition among the boroughs. And that was kind of dropped in the first year of the pandemic. And last year, it returned. It's like, okay, we can still have it. We're just not going to call a winner. And then there was also a park-by-park competition among city parks. The New York City City Nature Challenge is organized by Kelly O'Donnell of Macaulay College. So this year, what are we doing? 443 cities, as I mentioned, all over the world, all continents except Antarctica. The observation period this year is at the end of April, beginning of May. And the identification period is that first week in May. The results will be announced on May 9th. So of interest is what events are happening during those 4 days. So there's a couple ways to find out. There are so many City Nature Challenge projects. It's hard to go onto iNaturalist and search to find them. You really have to spell out New York City. You have to spell out City Nature Challenge. If you spell out all those words, City Nature Challenge 2022, New York City, you should find the first project. The other two projects are the New York City sort of internal gamification projects. The Green Space Race replaces the Park by Park this year because not all of the green spaces that are participating are necessarily parks. There are other green spaces that are participating this year. So you want to participate in CNC 2022. You don't want to miss out on this fun. So create an account if you don't already have one. iNaturalist.org is a large project, but there are projects all over the world. For a variety of reasons, they have their own local adaptations, mostly for legal reasons and things like that, and different languages and so on and so forth. So you could join any of the iNaturalist platforms around the world and make your observations, and they will still contribute. They all feed into the global project. Make your observations during those 4 days from midnight to midnight. In New York City, there's kind of a friendly competition of who gets the first observation in the New York City Nature Challenge. You have to be ready. 1 year I got one. It was a snail in my garden. And then upload your observations as quickly as possible. If ideally during the observation period, because people can still be identifying things, but if you have to offload and transfer and stuff, they have to be uploaded as early as possible so that people can identify them. Everything will automatically be added if you're in a participating city. If you're in one of those 443 cities, it will automatically be added. You as an individual, if you happen to not be in one of these 443 cities or urban areas, you can join the global project. So there's one for anybody anywhere, and you can still have your observations contribute to City Nature Challenge. Torrey has some program of City Nature Challenge events this year. The first one is this lecture. You're in it right now. We have 2 field trips coming up. The first is going to be on Friday, noon to 2 p.m. at Calvert Vaux Park in Brooklyn. This is an interesting park. It has a variety of habitat. It is underobserved in iNaturalist, and that's why I selected it. I should note I have been since 2019 one of the Brooklyn Borough captains for the Battle of the Boroughs, so that's why I focused on Brooklyn. There's also going to be one on Sunday. I don't know how if a time has been selected yet for in Mount Loretto State Forest on Staten Island. So those are 2 opportunities to join Torrey. The Calvert Vaux will also have people who know bugs, me. We'll also have some birders. So we're really going to try to make it a bioblitz where we're covering a lot of different taxa in one place during those 4 days. And then we're going to have an identification party. This is an interesting event where we all are in there. We're all on video. We're all can talk, and we can chat and share links with interesting observations or ask for help, on a particular thing that's puzzling, or there's some disagreement on something, we want to get some expert advice, those kinds of things. So Torrey's going to have one focusing on plant IDs, so that'll be cool. So just in closing, you can get a hold of us on iNaturalist. I am XRAS. There's a long story about how I got that name. If anybody's interested, we'll talk offline. And Zihao is very clearly labeled as Zihao Wang. He's very different on his other platforms. We're both on Twitter, both active on Twitter. We both participate in the Wildflower Hour NYC, which will be tonight at 8 o'clock. I have a lot of photos. All my photos end up on Flickr, so you can search for me there. And Flatbush Gardener, that is my sort of web name, my social media name that I use all over the place. So some places I'm better known as Flatbush Gardener. Anything you want to add here, Zihao, on your behalf?
Oh, you can also find me on Instagram. I post a lot of things on Instagram. That's my picture deposit. But yeah, you can find me very easily there. So.
Are you also Viola?
Oh, I chose a more normal name. It's called City Botanist. You can find me there.
Right, City Botanist. Okay.
Botanical spammer. I'm the spammer.
Okay. That is our pre-planned program. So I turn it back to Jordan.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this really interesting presentation. This was super cool. I actually, while you guys were giving this presentation, like right at the very beginning, I was starting to learn a lot because I went and linked my OrcID to my account and like changed the licensing for my observations and stuff like that. That was awesome. All that is super helpful. So we're gonna open this up to questions. So if you guys have questions, definitely write in the chat or notify that you have a question. We can talk to you guys. Yeah.
I was wondering about threatened or rare plants, about obscuring locations. If you guys could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. This is where there's another role in iNaturalist that is quite a privileged role called curator. And curators are usually researchers, or they're like wildlife specialists or something like that, and they can help with flagging a taxon as sensitive. So there's two ways that can happen. So if the taxon is flagged as rare or vulnerable like that, then iNaturalist often will automatically obscure the observation. And obscure is really obscured. Like there's Brooklyn observations, because people have set it as obscured. There's Brooklyn observations that are showing off the coast of New Jersey, right? So it's somewhere in Brooklyn, but you're never going to know where it is. So for those that are set that way, it'll automatically be set and you don't have a choice. You can also go in and explicitly say you want to obscure the location. And people, when they're beginning, this is often something I need to coach them on, and saying like they've set the radius of the location to like 100 miles. Okay, it's too big, but it also doesn't obscure the location because you still have the center of the circle. It's not accomplishing what they want. They're not actually obscuring the location. Obscure just gives you a huge box, and it's a random point in there that's what people see. So you can obscure a location. Often people will do that when they're photographing things in their garden, for example. They don't want to reveal the location of their home, that kind of thing. So it's a perfectly valid thing to do, and you could choose to automatically obscure your locations. You can set that on your profile, or you could do it observation by observation. Does that answer your question?
I want to also say that just coincidentally, while I was making all those modifications to my iNaturalist account, I discovered that you can preferentially reveal locations to specific people. So there's a tab that you can check a box that says like, oh, I trust Lydia. You can know my address.
Yeah.
Or she can know
it also is affects when your observations are showing up in projects, whether they're automated because it's a collection project, or it's something you have to explicitly add. You can set the permissions, right? So you can say, I don't want to automatically trust a project owner, a project admin, with my obscured locations. And that's usually a good idea, because you have projects can be created by almost anybody on iNaturalist. You really don't know. But then you have projects like those that were set up for the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey. If there was some bees are not typically at risk of collection, but maybe butterflies, right? So if there's a rare butterfly, then that could be obscured, and you only want to trust particular projects with the actual location because they need it for their research.
I had a little question. So I was curious if you guys had any advice for dealing with invasives, and like, because I like with the spotted lanternfly last year, all of that was kind of like a bit of mania with iNaturalist, and like, I find this all very interesting, because like on some level we do need to know like, oh, how many of these things are out there and where are they exactly, but maybe we don't is there, is there value in having people like identify everyone they see, right?
Oh yeah, I actually just recently got an update from the agency. So they actually telling us to stop calling them about spotted lanternfly in New York City, because there are so many. There's like is considered firmly established and widely distributed in New York City. So there's no point to report it because they know it's here. So they're getting like hundreds of calls every day and for the same thing. So I mean,
yeah, their social media campaign was too successful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
It's kind of
definitely,
amazing,
yeah.
the establishment of that in such a short period of time.
Yeah.
But they're
Yeah,
also finding that it's not doing like fatal damage to the big trees at least. So the threat might not be as severe as like initially thought.
Well, that's good.
So it's still evolving situation, but it's not like doom and gloom, right?
Great.
I got a private message, and I'm happy to answer it in the open. Where did you get the iNat T-shirt? iNaturalist now has a store, and you can buy all kinds of little things. The very first thing they offered was a T-shirt, and I got a black T-shirt first, but that was too hot to wear in the summer. So I got a gray T-shirt and a slightly larger size because I needed it. So there's all kinds of things now you can get. There's different kinds of swag you can get that have iNaturalist, and all of that goes to support the platform. You can also contribute directly to iNaturalist. I have I'm making a monthly contribution to them, and it shows up on my profile. I see there's a question. So aside from the, here's the things to do, are there things to not do? What are the don'ts to consider? Zihao, do you want to take that? Because you spoke about a lot of them already.
So we talk about it a little bit. The main thing is to post pictures that's of garden plants or like plants that has been planted intentionally in a location. So those are garden plants, and iNaturalist is for documentation of nature. So how species naturally migrate without direct human interference. So like the weeds in our gardens, we didn't bring them intentionally. Those are wild. But like any flowers, planted trees, street trees, those are not as valuable as the wild organisms in terms of the scientific value. So that's a big don't. And Chris, do you have anything add to that? Like don't do.
Well, I have sort of a take on what you just said, which is I'm going to be giving 2 workshops on iNaturalist to so the New York City Community Garden Coalition has an annual conference called Grow Together for community gardens and community gardeners. And I submitted a workshop proposal, and I got into 2 of them to do iNaturalist for community gardens. And obviously, I'm going to very heavily emphasize if you planted it, you have to mark it as cultivated. And while there's not a scientific benefit to those observations, there's definitely a benefit to community gardens and the gardeners because they can document the phenology of their crops. They can document when they're blooming, they can document when the fruit is setting, they can have a record of what they grew, and they can have a visual record of the condition. So there's a lot of potential value for community gardens in particular, I think, in using it appropriately. That'll be in those workshops, and I'll have some material about that when I'm done. Other kind of general don'ts. You're not supposed to take pictures of people and upload them. People do it. It's okay to identify it as Homo sapiens, but it's going to be excluded from being distributed. But you shouldn't, it's discouraged. I will say it's discouraged, but it's
feel like
not
there isn't
prohibited.
much point to observing the presence of humans like anywhere on Earth because they're everywhere.
Yeah, well, and also the fact that somebody made the observation, obviously there are humans present at that location. The other thing that I see, and I ding it when I see it, is artwork. If somebody posts a photo of a wooden sculpture of, an eagle or something, I'm going to identify it as a die cut because it's wood, it's a tree, it's a die cut. I don't know what kind of wood it is. I don't know. I'm not going to identify it as an eagle, right? There's no point in that kind of thing. I actually saw somebody upload a drawing of a robot as an observation. And it's like, okay, that's cute, but it's really just getting in the way of things. So no artworks, no inanimate objects or renderings or those kinds of things. I can't think of anything else right now. Oh, there's another don't. Only upload your photographs, content that you created, things that you observed. This is a bad thing that people sometimes get into where they're saying, oh, here's what is this flower? It's like, you can use the Seek app for that. It doesn't upload it to iNaturalist. It doesn't pollute the database. If you just want to identify something, you could present a photo to Seek and it will try to identify it for you. But it shouldn't be uploaded to iNaturalist as an observation if you yourself did not take the photo. And sometimes it's hard to tease this out, but there's often clues like the location makes no sense, right? It's the location is where they happen to upload the observation, clearly not where the photo was taken. Sometimes the date and time don't make any sense. Like, oh, here's a flower blooming. Yes, but it wasn't blooming in February. That kind of thing. So people, those of us who, troll the observations in a particular area, we scrape these things off and use it as an opportunity to inform people. Don't do that. Here's things you can do. Here's a better way to go about this.
Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, for your great presentation, and also thank you to the community here for your lovely questions, and also for this great for Desiree for these links to how people can like continue to get involved, and also for your links as well, Chris. These are fantastic, and I really hope that that some of the people here that had a good time and learned a lot from your presentation, your seminar, take what they learned and go and like get their hands dirty with the City Nature Challenge. I think that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, hope to see you out there.